Reading Mastery, Lesson 104, Part 2. Chapter 14, Tom Takes Becky's Punishment. Focus questions for today. Think of these while we're reading. Why did Tom take Becky's punishment? Why did the schoolmaster have an anatomy book? Why was Becky particularly afraid of the schoolmaster's punishment? When Tom was punished for the spelling book, why didn't Becky tell the schoolmaster what had really happened? The story says Tom was inspired by the greatness of his own act. What does that phrase mean? So, let's begin this lesson. Chapter 14, Tom Takes Becky's Punishment. While Alfred was pouring ink over Tom's spelling book, Tom arrived home for lunch in a dreary mood. But there was something about Aunt Polly's manner during lunch that swept away his low spirits. And when she kissed him goodbye, he became light-hearted and happy again. He started to school and met Becky Thatcher in Meadow Lane. Without a moment's hesitation, Tom ran to her and said, "I acted mighty mean today, Becky, and I'm so sorry. I won't ever do that again, as long as I ever live. Please make up, won't you?" The girl stopped and looked him scornfully in the face. "I'll never speak to you again, Mr. Thomas Sawyer." She tossed her head and passed on. Tom was so stunned that he said nothing, but he was in a rage nevertheless. He moped in the schoolyard. He soon saw Becky and delivered stinging remark as he passed. Becky could hardly wait for school to begin, because she was so impatient to see Tom punished for the spelling book. Poor Gruel, she did not know how fast she was nearing trouble herself. The schoolmaster, Mr. Dobbins, had always wanted to be a doctor. Every day he took a mysterious book out of his desk and read it when the class was studying. He kept that book under lock and key. Every student in school was dying to have a glimpse of the book, but the chance never came. Now, as Becky was passing by the desk, she noticed that the key was in the lock. It was a precious moment. She glanced around, found herself alone, and the next instant had the book in her hands. The title page, Anatomy, meant nothing to her, so she began to turn the pages. She turned to a handsome picture of a man, completely naked. At that moment, a shadow fell on the page. Tom Sawyer stepped in at the door and caught a glimpse of the picture. Becky snatched at the book to close it and tore the picture right down the middle. She thrust the book into the desk, turned the key, and turned away with shame. "Tom Sawyer, you are just as mean as you can be to sneak up on a person and look at what they're looking at." "How could I know what you were looking at anything?" "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Tom Sawyer. You know you're going to tell on me, and oh, what shall I do? What shall I do? I'll be punished, and I'll never be punished in school, and I've never been punished in school." Then she stamped her foot and said, "Be so mean if you want to. I know something that's going to happen. You just wait and see." She ran out of the school. Tom stood rather flustered by his attack. Presently he said to himself, "So Becky's never been punished in school? Shucks. Well, of course I ain't going to tell old Dobbins, because there's other ways of getting even with her that ain't so mean. Old Dobbins will ask who tore his book. Nobody'll answer. Then he'll have to do what he always does. Ask first one and then the other, and when it comes to the right girl, he'll know it, without any telling. Well, it's kind of a tight place for Becky Thatcher, because there ain't any way out of it." Tom joined the mob of scholars outside. In a few moments, the schoolmaster arrived at school and school began. The boy did not feel a strong interest in his studies. Every time he stole a glance at the girl's side of the room, Becky's face troubled him. Considering all things, he did not want to pity her, and yet he did feel pity. Presently, the spelling book discovery was made, and Tom's mind was entirely full of his own matters for a while after that. Becky showed good interest in the proceedings. She did not expect that Tom could get out of his trouble by denying he spilled the ink on the book himself, and she was right. The denial only seemed to make things worse for Tom. Becky tried to believe she was glad, but she found she was not. When Mr. Dobbins began to punish Tom, she had an impulse to get up and tell on Alfred Temple. but she made an effort and forced herself to keep still because, said she to herself, he'll tell about me tearing the picture. I wouldn't say a word, not to save his life. Tom took his punishment and went back to his seat. He thought it was possible that he had upset the ink on the spelling book himself without knowing it. He had denied the crime because it was his custom. A whole hour drifted by. The schoolmaster sat nodding in his chair, and the air was drowsy with the hum of study. By and by, Mr. Dobbins straightened himself, yawned, unlocked his desk, and reached for his book. But he did not know whether to take it out or leave it. Most of the pupils glanced up indifferently, but there were two that watched his movements with intent eyes. Mr. Dobbins fingered his book absently for a while, then took it out and settled himself in his chair to read. Tom shot a glance at Becky. She looked like a hunted and helpless rabbit. Tom instantly forgot his quarrel with her. Quick! Something must be done. Done in a flash, too. He had an inspiration. He would run and snatch the book, spring through the door, and run off. But Tom waited for one little instant, and his chance was lost. Mr. Dobbins opened the book. If Tom only had the chance back again. Too late. There was no help for Becky now, he thought. The next moment, Mr. Dobbins faced the class. Every eye sank under his gaze, which even put fear in the innocent. There was silence for 10 seconds while Mr. Dobbins gathered his anger. Then he spoke. Who tore this book? There was not a sound. He could have heard a pin drop. The stillness continued. Mr. Dobbins searched face after face for signs of guilt. Benjamin Rogers, did you tear this book? A denial. Another pause. Joseph Harper, did you? Another denial. Tom's uneasiness grew more and more intense under the slow torture of the proceedings. The schoolmaster scanned the ranks of boys, considered a while, then turned to the girls. Amy Lawrence. A shake of the head. Gracie Miller? The same sign. The next girl was Becky Thatcher. Tom was trembling from head to foot with excitement and a sense of the hopelessness of the situation. Becky Thatcher. Tom glanced at her face. It was pale with terror. Did you tear? No. Look me in the face. Her hands rose in appeal. Did you tear this book? A thought shot like lightning through Tom's brain. He sprang to his feet and shouted, I done it! The class stared in amazement at Tom's incredible folly. Tom stood a moment to gather himself together and then stepped toward to receive his punishment. Surprise, gratitude, and admiration shone upon him out of poor Becky's eyes. Inspired by the greatness of his own act, he calmly received the cruel command to remain 2 hours after school. Tom knew that Becky would wait for him outside till his captivity was done, so the 2 hours would be well spent. Tom went to bed that night planning revenge against Alfred Temple, for Becky had told him everything. But even the longing for revenge had given way soon to more pleasant thoughts, and he fell asleep at last, with Becky's latest words lingering dreamily in his ear. Tom, how could you be so noble? That concludes today's reading. You now have your vocabulary review, Part D, logic, Part E, comprehension, Part F, and writing, Part G, to do on your own. This is due in 24 hours. Take care.